Welcome to FO Talks. With me is Joost de Kluijver, a fantastic Dutchman who works in making waste reduction a reality in the tech industry. The tech industry generates a lot of waste. Many of us, or in fact all of us, use cell phones, laptops, all sorts of electronic things. And most of these electronic things then end up as waste. And Joost has run a business, created a business that reduces this in Africa right now, but this could expand globally. Welcome, Joost.
Thanks, Atul. Great to be here.
So, Joost, without further ado, how much waste does the tech industry, and by that I mean, of course, electronic tech, because I don't mean technology broadly. I mean the technology we are using now to record this interview. After all, you're in Spain, I'm in America. How much waste does the tech industry produce?
Yeah, great question. You can imagine the tech industry doesn't really like to talk about waste. They're iconic, special, beautiful products, and indeed they are. Yeah, but all tech at some point dies. And when electronics die, you think of billions of devices. Just phones alone is around 2 billion devices. Add laptops, other smart products, and now, of course, with the implementation of IoT and others, you'll think of many billions of devices going to waste each year. So definitely an opportunity to work on that.
So what does that waste contain?
I think that's partly the beauty, also the complexity perhaps of electronics. Just look at any government legislation at the moment and they'll look at electronics as actually the source of materials for the future, because they contain, of course, the materials that are needed for electronics, but also the green transition very much depends on the materials that you can extract from this waste category. Think of the precious ones, gold, silver, and others, but also the critical raw materials are found in these products, scarce products, scarce materials, and of course a variety of other materials that you'll find on a plastic or on a type of copper type of products.
Could you give us an example of some of these critical materials? In fact, indeed, some of them come from places like Democratic Republic of Congo, which is not very democratic and not really a republic.
Yeah, some of them are famous, not always for the right reason. But look at, indeed, probably the one that you're referring to, tungsten, mined in Congo, quite famous, unfortunately, for the wrong reasons. Conflict materials, as they're called, meaning that they fuel local conflicts because they're quite precious, not just because of the value, but the fact that they're available in just very few parts of the world, China being famous, of course, but also parts of Africa. A few places here and there in Latin America, but look at, for example, Europe, you will not find most of the materials such as these available at all, let alone the recycling or refining capacity for those metals. So there are quite a few. I can't name all of them. Just a phone would have 40 to 60 types of different metals or minerals needed to be the magic that it is.
Yeah, I mean, people talk about indium, potassium, lithium, cobalt, graphite, tantalum, gallium, neodymium, terbium, dysprosium, and so on and so forth. I could go on. But the point is, a lot of these that you refer to are difficult to mine. They are not available everywhere. They come from places like Latin America, Africa, and China. And therefore, in some ways, they are scarce. So it probably makes sense to recycle them for strategic purposes, if nothing else. My question to you is different, though. Where does this electronic waste go? Let's say I use my phone, and I have a dead phone right here. All right? I have a phone that is dead like a rock. Where does this phone go? I'm done with it. It's useless. It doesn't even switch on. Where does this go now?
Well, I would say you're not alone. It's quite funny to see, actually, right? You have waste, and still you have it so close to you. And that happens around the world. I think if you look at the European continent, for example, there are billions of devices dormant, as they're called. So waste, especially small electronics, isn't really considered waste, especially if you look at those phones, maybe some of your other products like a tablet or a laptop. They were crucial for your life. You've been working on them and staring at them the whole day. And so a lot of people actually hoard them in their private facilities, in their houses, in the cupboard perhaps. Luckily, you'll see that a lot of devices also get a second life. So, for example, here in Europe, where I live, you'll see that devices that have been used for maybe 1, 2, hopefully a little bit longer, a few years, will get a second life outside of Europe as well. Something I was also active in my previous business. Reuse is, of course, a great concept. It means that a device that is considered less valuable or maybe even useless, maybe not emotionally, but let's say technically, less valuable here in Europe, would still be used for many years in parts of Asia, definitely also in African markets, which is very great to see. I was lucky enough to experience how extremely important those devices are for people's lives in a country like Tanzania or Kenya, really changing the person's perspective of a job, of the reality to be able to connect. So it's great to see that those devices get a second life. But you can imagine at some point, Alex, as I mentioned, electronics break down. And in these markets, that becomes a bit of a challenge.
Got it. And so let's say an electronic laptop is completely broken down. Where does it end up? Does it end up in Bangladesh? Does it end up in the port of Alang in India, which is a famous port for sending stuff, especially ships? Does it end up in China? Where does this waste, does it end up in Africa? Where does this waste end up?
Yeah, so you'll see that the waste differs a bit per category. Electronic waste is quite a researched category of waste. So go to the UN or ITU, you'll see a lot of reports talking about the challenges and the responsibility and what we need to do as societies. Because historically, a lot of waste was illegally, let's say, shipped or dumped, maybe even was the term for it, to parts of the world where legislation is a bit less strict. Perhaps not always with phones and laptops, because they are quite precious, also for the material content. But look at low value or more hazardous type of electronic waste that has definitely occurred quite a bit. Refrigerators, for example, broken down, they would they would cost quite a bit of money to recycle properly in Europe. And so, especially in the 80s and the 90s, a lot of those waste streams ended up in developing parts of the world, where people would extract some of the metals and for the rest, unfortunately, wouldn't know what to do with them. If you look at your phone or your laptop, when it's still usable, indeed, they might go to India, they could go to Africa. Increasingly, they're also being reused in Europe. But research shows that the wide majority of devices that get a second life ultimately end up in the developing parts of the world, the global south, if you will.
Got it. So explain to me the concept of waste reduction, something you have spent a large part of your life working on, and take us right to the basics.
Yeah, and that's a great question, because I think that's often what's missing a bit, the basics. It's very easy to make the topic of waste reduction quite complex. I referred to a few reports just now. Don't read them. I'm quite sure you will not get any energy from that or get excited to act on the topic. At least I definitely didn't. It's rather abstract. It's very global. It's very complex. Waste streams, legislation, as I mentioned, are all very much involved. Whereas actually the basic concept is that waste isn't a great concept, especially if it's mistreated or not treated at all. And apply that to electronic waste, and you have, well, as I mentioned, products that contain a lot of materials, heavy metals, but also chemicals, flame retardants. You can imagine, for example, batteries would have a few products in them that you wouldn't want to have in your backyard or buried somewhere that it is forgotten at some point. So waste reduction, unfortunately, is often something that is just, let's say, riddled with legislation and policies and big discussions, and in very few cases, it is a topic that is as simple as less waste is a good thing. You are a consumer. I want to sell you something. So what about we make that topic of waste reduction, less waste, which I think everyone supports. Let's make that doable. Let's make that relevant for you. Let's make it actionable. Let's make it a positive topic instead of, unfortunately, something that it has been in the last 20, 30, maybe even longer already, years, a topic of responsibility and guilt and pointing the blame to others. Waste reduction is a bit of a political topic. Well, it shouldn't be. It should be all about this is actionable, it's logical to act on it, and it can be fun to do so.
Okay, got it. So use less, recycle more at its essence. That is what you're saying is waste reduction.
Yeah, I would say that that's indeed also the message we've been hearing. There are quite a few messages that we hear. Unfortunately, that doesn't always mean that has an effect on us as humans, right? I think we've been hearing that we shouldn't smoke, for example. That doesn't mean that people's behaviors change. I think that's unfortunately sometimes a bit of the magic that's missing. Our industry, I've been part of the telecom industry for 25 years and working with others in the broader industry around tech. We're really good at storytelling. We're really good at engaging and convincing people to buy our products or our services and go for ridiculously expensive gadgets. But we don't use any of that, the element of convincing and luring people into our shops and our business models. We don't use that at all for the topic of waste reduction. As soon as we start talking about that, we give people a very boring report or a roadmap or a life cycle analysis, and then we expect people to get excited by that. I think that's the challenge at the moment. We treat waste reduction as something that we're actually a little bit ashamed of. And let's be honest, the way that it's presented currently, I can imagine that people don't want to get too much involved in the topic.
Got it. Well, when the moment you said the tech industry has been really good at selling stories, I thought of Apple Think Different and showing Gandhi and Einstein and that iconic ad, or that ad in which a woman comes and throws a hammer. And I thought of Google and Think Different, and even Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, for all his personal communication challenges, developed Facebook as a place where we are connecting the world. So yes, there has been an extraordinary storytelling aspect of the tech industry, but one doesn't see the same commitment to waste. At least I haven't, and I lived in California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. As you know, I taught at Berkeley. My question to you is: how do you get this industry, which often is in a state of denial, burying its head like an ostrich in the sand, to act on waste reduction?
Yeah, I mean,
how do you make it relevant? How do you make it relevant for an Elon Musk or a Mark Zuckerberg or a Tim Cook?
Yeah, exactly. I think we are a bit to blame as sustainability people. I consider myself as one, although I'm trained as a commercial guy. I definitely spend a bit of time in the sustainability space. I think we can blame ourselves a bit for that, right? For the fact that a few of the names that you mentioned just now, arguably quite commercial folks, wouldn't or couldn't care less of the topic of waste reduction. I think it's partly because how it has been positioned. It has so often been positioned as taking responsibility, doing the right thing, making sure that you don't pollute. Yeah, if you're a commercial person, that's not what you get out of bed for. So approach that my company, my network has taken is a bit different. I think the traditional way of solving a sustainability challenge is let's find out where the impact is and let's find who's to blame and then write a proposal or, create a campaign or something like that and hope that people feel guilty enough. That doesn't work. In the commercial world, it's actually the
You mean
opposite.
you
of
mean
what
neither
works.
you mean neither Catholic nor Protestant nor Jewish guilt has worked?
I think if we can use those forces for this topic, I might give it a try. But so far, I haven't seen indeed also those forces given waste reduction, let's say the attention it needs. Yes, people feel guilty and they act, but that's not what the commercial world is about. The commercial world is about what do you want? And maybe sometimes people don't even know it themselves. And indeed, Apple is a great example of that. People didn't really knew at the time that they wanted the touch screens and the smartest device. So you need to indeed also convince them a little bit of what you have is attractive. But both elements, so either giving a customer what they want or creating demand for what you have, are not about putting impact or the environment or climate, etc. first. It is the customer that starts in this discussion. So the approach that my network took is the same thing. Let's first find out what customers actually want. What do they know? What do they appreciate? What drives them? And then let's see how the topic of waste reduction can actually deliver on those needs that they have. And I would say quite simply asking the question, what an average person wants, it may be a bit of a depressing answer to some extent, right? They just want to be cooler than their neighbor, or they want to have a nice story, or they just don't want to be bothered. Pretty much, human behavior. But if that is the case, then we should offer waste reduction in a customer-centric, which means indeed at the moment, extremely simple way. We cannot ask the customer to endure pain or to sacrifice themselves because we, as an industry or as sustainability professionals, feel that they need to be more sustainable. We need to deliver sustainability, waste reduction, in a way that the customer does want to use it. And that means extremely simply, which is indeed the opportunity of the industry at the moment, because then you deliver something to customers, and you think of 70, 80% of all customers that they actually want. But it does mean changing the narrative. Instead of keep talking about sustainability as your responsibility, otherwise you're a bad guy, you turn sustainability into something, this is what I have for you. You make it a commercial opportunity.
All right. So you've been working in the commercial opportunity space, and you've been working with an interesting model. So why don't you explain what you have been trying? What are the lessons you have derived from it, and how this could scale up to different parts of the world?
Yeah, thanks for that. Given the context that I just indeed shared, sustainability is great, but commercial beats sustainability, right? You can't fight the market, although we love to do that as sustainability folks. So working with the market
Well,
means...
Joseph Stalin did fight the market and did win for a while.
Indeed. And he created a great country along the way.
So did Jawaharlal Nehru, the founder of independent India, and so did many post-colonial leaders.
Yeah. Well, I think the market nowadays is a bit stronger than it was a few decades ago. But I fully agree. There are ways to do it.
Whole fire, Joost. I should also add that none of them really led their countries to success. The countries that succeeded managed to balance both a strong welfare state and freedom for markets. The countries that went either way ended up slightly awry. Over to you.
Sure. And I think that's also really the concept of social entrepreneurship, as it's called. My company is a social enterprise, which indeed means that the business model needs to be about value creation, about creating profit. If you focus solely on profit, indeed, you get the countries that you see around the world at the moment that do disrespect some, I think, other important parts of life. So I think the combination of positive impact, positive innovation with profit, it's the combination that we need for the future. If you apply that indeed to the concept of waste reduction and indeed take into account that we cannot change a $1 trillion industry overnight, because if we could, of course, let's do that, but we can't. We need pragmatism. So the approach that we now apply in collaboration with telcos such as Vodafone, but also OEMs use our service. I can't mention, unfortunately, their names because of NDAs. We work with anyone that sells electronics, is very much on the concept of customer centricity. So the basic thinking is everyone, maybe a few people here and there left out, but everyone is in favor of less waste. But unfortunately, people just do not want to act on it too much, or maybe even sometimes at all. So it needs to be created and offered as a service. Taking that into something that you can then do today, and the concept that was created is one for one. So one for one means that a tech brand would sell a device to a customer, and they promise the customer that this new device that they get, which is great and it's going to change their lives and it's such a beautiful, impactful product, it also directly leads to one end-of-life device collected and recycled on behalf of the customer. So the customer gets as a certainty, as an add-on service with their new purchase, with their new phone or the new device that they've bought, the certainty that one end-of-life device is collected for them. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to hand in their device. If they want to do that, that's great. Most people, unfortunately, currently don't. They get the certainty that the vendor, the company that has sold the device to them, will make sure an end-of-life device is collected on their behalf. You can imagine, on the back end, my company actually does this. So we are the add-on that, for example, a company like Vodafone attaches to a phone that they sell to a customer, and with that create a unique differentiator. No one else in the industry can say this. One for one, your phone has led to one end-of-life phone collected. Great for marketing, great for storytelling, but above all, this delivers on the need of the light green customer, as we call them. The person that says, sure, green is good, but I would like you, vendor, supplier, to do the work for me. Then I'm happy. And that's, I think, the commercial thinking of this service. This way, you tap into a latent customer need. This way, you create competitive advantage as a tech brand, as a seller of electronics.
Got it. So this means you need to have a logistical operation. So walk us through, how do you actually collect these phones?
Indeed, yeah. I mean, the business model is crucial. It's a starting point, and this is how we fund the collection. But for the last 15 years, we've already collected these devices, and we do that in the global south. So far, predominantly in Africa. Some work was done also in Southeast Asia, but think a country like Ghana, Nigeria, not on everyone's mind. Google e-waste Ghana, and you'll see pictures of what we discussed a bit earlier in the conversation. Not very much actionable, not always that positive, but it's the reality. Electronic waste in these markets is mismanaged, if managed at all, and as a result, it creates challenges, pollution, but also human health challenges and others. So what we've been doing for the last 15 years is that we work with the informal sector. There is no formal waste management in most of these countries, and set up collection networks with a very simple message. We will buy the devices that you cannot use anymore, that for you have become waste, and as a result, a bit of a problem. And we will make sure that those devices are properly recycled. And with that, we mean the extraction of metals, which could then, of course, be reused for a variety of purposes. So what we've been doing for the last 15 years, and we've collected over 7 million devices so far, is to establish informal collection networks with our local partners we've been working with for many years, creating jobs, creating opportunities, and turning a waste challenge, a dangerous waste challenge actually, into an opportunity for growth, opportunity for materials, and now, in collaboration with a lot of policymakers, for example, here in Europe, a possibility to source metals that would otherwise be lost, and predominantly what actually would go to the illegal recycling sector, which is currently biggest in some Asian countries. I won't mention them specifically, but you might know which ones.
Okay, so you've talked about policymakers, so let's move on to that part of the discussion. What policy changes do you need? Um, does, say, a country like Ghana or Nigeria need European investment to create a recycling plant? Does there need to be more regulation enforcing all the telecom operators in, say, Europe to do this one for one? Does this mean training people in other countries? What exactly are the policy? What exactly are the policy changes you're looking for?
Yeah, great question. I mean, there's definitely an appetite for a silver bullet. You can imagine it hasn't been found. Some
And
of the measures,
there can't be a silver bullet, but there can be some policy tweaks for sure.
indeed, and maybe actually a big policy tweak because, as you mentioned, the policy and some of the measures that you described have been tried actually, or maybe are currently on paperwork at least in place, but they still have the traditional sustainability thinking as a starting point. There's a problem, it's someone's fault or someone's responsibility, so we're either going to fine them or limit them or punish them, and then hopefully everything will be fine. The main result has been that the activities go ahead, but all under the radar. Look at, for example, the African continent. The official recycling rate of electronics is 1%. That doesn't mean that all rest are in people's drawers or lying around. It means that the wide majority of electronic waste in Africa is managed by the illegal recycling sector, which are just individuals trying to turn this waste into metals to make some money. Sometimes also some companies trying to export it to other parts of the world, but it is, not the thing that we would want.
Very quickly, to stop you there, that is the challenge in much of the third world, or you can call it developing world or global south, doesn't matter what you call it, all the way from Latin America to Africa to South Asia and Southeast Asia, that a lot of the stuff is done informally, it is done illegally. Indeed, the different states and governments have jurisdiction or have laws that are either outdated or often inadequate, and the enforcement machine is often corrupt as well.
Indeed. And it doesn't really help to try to enforce something that doesn't lead to anything. So let's look at indeed electronic waste in a country like Nigeria, where we're quite active already for a number of years. If you would enforce the legislation that is currently there, you would have piles of electronic waste that would then be recycled. But where? By whom? There is no recycling capacity. So when it comes to the question, what is needed? First of all, we believe that there needs to be a pool, a demand, an economic driver to extract materials that are currently not extracted, which is bad for everyone, right? If you landfill electronics, for example, those materials will go to waste. So creating a pool, which is something that we're doing, but there are, of course, other ways as well. For example, by creating quotas saying, if you produce electronics, then you have to use at least 20, 30, etc. Percentage of recycled content in those products. So creating a pool, creating a market mechanism is definitely a way forward, because just trying to keep people from doing bad things, which they're usually just doing to make some money, is going to be extremely difficult. But secondly, if you would enforce, and indeed, as I mentioned, look at some of those African markets, and do not have any recycling capacity, then it becomes a bit of a farce. So what we're now working on, together with a few of our partners, but you can imagine also something that is highly looked at by, for example, the European Commission, and also a few member states like the Netherlands government. How about building recycling capacity in African countries? Not as an alternative to European capacity, but as a way to pre-process some of that waste locally, which could then, of course, be made available to other parts of the world, for example, to Europe, and predominantly, and maybe that's not always a driver that people will be openly about, but predominantly also to prevent these waste streams currently illegally being shipped from Africa to parts of Asia, as I mentioned earlier, because that, of course, creates even more dependence of materials, not just for Europe, but for the whole world. So urban mining, as it's called, which you can imagine wasn't the main driver for us when we started this company. We wanted, and we still want to, make the topic of waste reduction relevant for customers and consumers in the tech industry. But at the same time, with the political shifts and the focus of material independence, this is now a huge topic for Europe. How about collaborating with countries, for example, in Africa, turning their waste challenges into material opportunities for us and for them?
Indeed. So what you're saying is that a clearer legislative framework setting incentives would work. Is there need for penalties too?
Clearly, there are bad actors. I've seen many shipments originating from the US, Europe, other parts of the world that simply contain waste. Think too old, partly repairable, partly harvestable, and these are really bad type of shipments. This happens also with textile, but electronics, of course, infamous for the fact that you would have a refrigerator, the copper wiring is removed, and then the gases, the foam, etc., are just scattered around or burned because that's the cheapest thing to do. In Africa, even the only thing that you often can do. So illegal, purely let's dump our waste in a less restricted area or part of the world. These shipments need to be cracked down on. But we shouldn't be naive in saying every shipment, every piece of electronic that travels around the world is bad, which is something that you now hear, for example, in Europe, right? Let's keep all of our electronics in Europe so we will recycle them. Recycling is something that you do as a last resort. If you can reuse products, and definitely mobile devices such as phones and tablets, etc., can be used for many years longer in, for example, African countries than that they will be in Europe because we're just too spoiled here. So reuse enable that. But when there's a problem, and the problem is at end of life, try to fix that, and if possible, try to turn it into something positive instead of just indeed regulating it into something that people feel is a solution. But it's not as simple as saying we need to recycle everything locally. Trade is important. Reuse is really valuable, especially for countries like Uganda, where I've worked and lived. You see that if you stop those trades, usable devices going into the country, you get riots even.
I see. So legislative changes. Let's talk about other changes, incentives as in funds, development organizations like the World Bank or others could step in. The Dutch has a development budget. The UK used to have one before it hit financial troubles. Is there a move? Could there be a move on the part of Europeans in particular to say create recycling plants in certain African countries, say Nigeria?
Yes, but the narrative needs to be correct. And again, the narrative by sustainability professionals hasn't been great. It is there's a problem in another country and we need to solve it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine that's a very bad pitch, especially nowadays.
Yes.
But the narrative that has changed in Europe quite significantly is materials are scarce. We don't have any in Europe. We're not producing anything.
Yeah.
So what about indeed changing circular policy from, let's say, the belly button staring? I'm not sure if that's an English term, but just focusing on
navel gazing. That's
backyard.
an English. That's
navel
an English
gazing.
term,
Thank you.
Yes,
that's much better. So from changing from that perspective into what about exporting circular technology exporting circular business models, and along the way strengthening our relationships as European governments with, for example, those growth economies in Egypt, in South Africa, in Nigeria, and many others. Again, really into a win-win. If that's the narrative, then you get a lot of support. It's great for European business, it's great for the materials that we very much need, but also it is going to be helpful for the way that we engage with the rest of the world. And at the moment, Europe is losing visibility, is losing relevance. So we need to have a bit of a different way. And I'm not saying our solution or our work is the only way, but it could be a way to indeed differentiate from the approach that, for example, China or the US has.
So you're arguing about a circular economy, and you're arguing that Europe could retain or regain relevance by championing the circular economy.
Indeed.
Yeah. Maybe one of the narratives might be what Lee Kuan Yew used. He said, if Europe does not export development south, then the South will export Europe people north. Of course, you remember Lee Kuan Yew. He was the leader of Singapore, and he kept saying that it is imperative for Europe to ensure that there is economic growth in Africa, particularly North Africa.
Indeed. We've actually heard that narrative from more right-winged parties in South Europe, where they would very much have difficulty explaining to their voters in the right side of the political spectrum.
Giorgia Meloni is a classic example. The Italian Prime Minister, she's using that narrative.
And I think you won't hear me saying that always about the more extreme parts of the right side, but this narrative makes sense. And so I think, as we also started the conversation, I think in the beginning, communication, narratives, positioning, it is so important. And we need to do so much better as sustainability professionals. We cannot keep continuing the old paradigm of we need to help or it's the right thing to do. It might be great for us, but we're just a so small group of people working that way. The rest of the people are not bad. The rest of the people just focus on the normal things, money making.
So virtue and guilt are not working. Virtue and guilt.
It doesn't work for everyone, and I think the alternative is also just more fun. Just making people feel guilty. I wouldn't be able to get energy from that. Making people see possibilities, bringing them something, showing that there's opportunity. I think there's a reason why business people like to do that more often.
Brilliant. Joost de Kluijver, I think I'm done with my questions. Any famous parting words for this interview?
If there's anyone that's commercial, has a commercial mind, and is looking at this video, it would be great to have more commercial creativity in the topic of waste reduction. Not because we will brainwash you into a green activist, but it is a beautiful topic, especially when you look at this from a commercial and customer-centric perspective. So anyone that is looking for a change from, as I think they're now called, the bullshit jobs, into one that has still a need for your skills, but then has an impact that is a little bit bigger than just the financial one. Consider using your brain for stuff like this.
Well, it is the need of the hour, Joost. Thank you very much for your time. We'll have you back. Lovely talking to you. Those of you who've been watching FO Talks, who've been watching this video on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you press the bell icon. Then you'll get notifications when such conversations come out. And go to our website, sign up for our newsletter, and make sense of the world. Bye for now.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.